Overdrive.
This edition of Pancakes and Politics Overdrive is proudly sponsored by Business Leaders for Michigan, the state's business roundtable, dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, education, widely shared prosperity, and a healthy economy.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Allen. I'm the executive editor here at the Michigan Chronicle. And today I have the pleasure of being with a few very impactful and profound women who do some amazing work here in the city of Detroit for the Pancakes and Politics Overdrive series. Today, this is the second iteration of our 2023 Overdrive series, brought to you by our sponsors at PNC Bank and Business Leaders for Michigan. We wouldn't be able to have these types of robust discussions about issues that impact Black Detroiters the way that we do without the support from sponsors, again, like PNC and Business Leaders for Michigan. The Michigan Chronicle's Pancakes and Politics series was really born from our desire to bring Black stakeholders to the table, not just to have a seat at the table, but to really push forward the mission and the issues that impact us here in the city of Detroit. Overdrive is really just an extension of that. The Pancakes and Politics series is traditionally an in-person conversation with leaders from the business community, civic leaders, economic leaders, education leaders, political leaders from across the state of Michigan. Overdrive is an extension of that, and it provides us with an opportunity to have a more in-depth kind of conversation with the stakeholders who are really driving about that change. And so today I'm really excited to be here with our lovely panelists. We have Linda Little. Linda is the president and CEO of the Neighborhood Service Organization. Thank you for joining us here, Linda.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jeremy.
We also have Portia Roberson, who is the CEO and president of Focus Hope.
And thank you for inviting me as well. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And rounding out our panel is Terry Weems, who was appointed earlier this year as the group executive for workforce for the city of Detroit. And she also leads the mayor's Workforce Development Board. So it's wonderful to have all you ladies here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today, we really want to dive into the topic of who's looking out for Detroit's low-income residents. We have the opportunity to hit on so many different avenues and areas with that question, and so it's a really big question. But I want to first throw it out to each one of you to sort of talk about what your roles are at your respective organizations and how you address this sort of 20,000 foot question of who's looking out for Detroit's low income residents. And I'd love to start with you, Terry.
Sure. So I'm responsible for developing and for just overall planning and oversight of the talent development programs and strategies for the Michigan Works Agency. Detroit at Work is generally the Michigan Works Agency for the city of Detroit. And my responsibility is to make sure that Detroiters are prepared, skilled up for opportunities that are coming up in our region. So my job is to look out for Detroiters and to make sure that they're preparing for and ready for opportunities as they come. I'm also responsible for making sure that employers get the talent that they need. So I'm certainly trying to look out for Detroiters in that way.
How about you, Linda, from your seat?
Yeah. So, I love this question, right? Because Detroit's most vulnerable is changing. There was a time when it used to be people who, really were the marginalized individuals in our community. But today we see in the community a vulnerable population that are women and children, people who work every day, the working poor or essential workers, as they were called during the pandemic. Everyday people who really can't afford a basic the basic needs to live and grow and develop in the city of Detroit. So our homeless population is a part of that. But we really see a different vulnerability in Detroiters today. So at NSO, we try to give a voice to that voiceless community and bring solutions that meet them where they are. So we work on integrated health and well-being services. So healthcare, all the basic wraparound supports, and we have a full continuum of housing solutions to address people who are faced with housing instability as well. And that is a really great challenge that we see in our city is housing. I'm sure Terry can certainly feel that as well as Portia. So that's what we do here at NSO, and we're continuing to work on how we can best meet the needs of the community.
And lastly, Portia, I want to throw it over to you.
Sure. So, I mean, both of my colleagues here are spot on. We see a different population now who needs our help. We have a Food for Seniors program that feeds folks over 60 years of age with a supplemental food box each month. And it used to be that people thought that the only folks that needed that were Detroit residents, but we serve in Washtenaw, Oakland, and Macomb County, as well as Wayne County. So we've seen the explosion of need throughout our region, not just in our city. We also, of course, do workforce development. So those same jobs that Terry's talking about, we're trying to make sure people have jobs not only today, but the jobs of the future, that we're training people for jobs that are going to exist 10 or 15 years from now. That means that we're leaning into the transition for a lot of companies to mobility and EV vehicles, because we know that it doesn't serve us or the students that come to us if we're only training them for jobs that are not going to exist 5 years from now. And then we have an early learning, a Head Start program and an early Head Start program. And, you know, everybody sort of snickers at me when I say that kids have to be competitive as they move into kindergarten. But really, in this global economy, kids need to be prepared to transition into kindergarten with that leg up, because they are competing with students across the world. So whether that is trying to add language programs to our Head Start program, or trying to give other things that we know will enhance their program in an early education way so that they can be successful at kindergarten, is all of what we do. So our sole focus Hope has always been, for the last 55 years that we've been in existence, is how can we supplement families to make sure that they are getting all that they need from a program like Focus Hope.
I love that, particularly, Linda, how you spoke about, you know, housing as a primary need. There's so many different angles to attack when you talk about, again, looking out for low-income residents. How do you decide what comes first? There are so many different organizations here in the city that are all doing great work simultaneously, and people don't often understand where to search for access to services that can assist them. But, you know, for these low-income residents who need a little extra support to really come out of their circumstances or grow from their circumstances, where's a great place for someone to start in terms of finding these services?
Yeah. So finding the services is one thing, and then the agencies like us who deliver the services, you know, where to start, because there's so much need, as Portia alluded to. Housing, you know, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, housing, safety, security, that's the floor, right? So if people don't have housing, nothing else is going to work. So in order to find housing, we have in Detroit we are part of HUD's, you know, we get federal dollars from the HUD to manage our shelter system. And they require for us to have a coordinated, centralized model. And there's a number that people can call if they need emergency shelter. There's a process where you have to, you know, go through an assessment to gain access to those federally funded programs. We call it the CAM, the Coordinated Assessment Model. That number is 305-0311. 313-305-0311. That's the CAM. But the city of Detroit also has a housing solutions division that they can call. It's newly formed this summer, And they have navigators that can help people access different housing supports that the city offers as well. And that's on the City of Detroit website. They can also call NSO, 888-360-WELL. And we have call center staff that are available to help people navigate the system. It's complex. It's not easy to navigate. We're working on things to try to make that easier to access. But there is help that is available. My phone number was so close to the CAM number, I would get phone calls by accident, one digit off. And I would help people, because that's what our agency does. So the first step is to not suffer alone, to reach out, call one of those numbers and ask for help. That's what we're here for. We are all in this together. That's one of the beautiful things about our great city. We stick together.
And I think that's wonderful. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you don't mind if I add to that. So when I think about the housing issue, so over 60% of the folks that we help and support with job placement and a variety of other programs have a housing need, whether it's homelessness or they're facing eviction or they're facing foreclosure. And then the other thing we're not really talking about is, how we prevent folks from getting into that space in the first place. It's really it's heartbreaking to me that there are so many people who are facing those issues and that they're not aware of the number of services that are available throughout the city of Detroit, including through organizations like NSO and Focus Hope. I know the city of Detroit, as you mentioned, has a plethora of programs, but the problem is the need is so great, the resources are so few, even with $200 million of funding through grants and otherwise, we're not able to serve the whole need. So I'm not sure what the solution is. I just know that we have a huge problem here. There are a lot of folks that are trying to tackle this issue, but I think number one is for folks to understand that there are resources out there, and to try to get connected to those resources as quickly as possible to ensure that we're preventing crises before they happen.
And I have to add, because Terry, that's a very significant point. We work with McKinsey as we call them our knowledge partners. We work with Real Times Media, and McKinsey published a very interesting statistic about Detroiters. That is 35% of Detroiters spend 70% of their income on housing, just a place to live. That doesn't include rent, utilities, gas in their car, if they have a car payment, child care, as Portia alluded to. And that is, the standard is 30%, right? You're not supposed to pay more than 30% on housing. So that number is astonishing because one misstep, one crisis, one unexpected payment, one medical bill, and they can't pay their rent. And then once you get behind, how do you catch up if you can't have savings? That is what we're experiencing here. And on top of that, the increased market rents, the average rent is now $1,200 a month, whereas 3 years ago, it was about $750. We're experiencing a shortage of housing units, places to live. People don't have the access to just places to live. So all of these things together is really creating a crisis for us. And so people just need to know that there are people who care. There are people who have solutions that are available to them, and we want them to reach out and ask for help.
Go ahead.
What we try to tell people all the time is that, particularly our employers who are coming to us after someone has trained in one of our programs and want them to come work for them, even the best employee, if their housing is insecure, if their children don't have a safe place to be, they can be the best and most well-trained person in terms of the actual job that they're coming to do. But the moment that they are uncertain as to whether or not they're going to be evicted, the moment that grandma does not come to watch their children and they have to take a day off, that is going to destroy the ecosystem of training someone and getting into a good paying job. So I think oftentimes we only think of job training in the sense of we're going to give them the skills they need to go do the job, but we also have to focus on other things and think about how we can get someone to Linda and to NSO so that they can do the work around housing, because that's the only way you're going to have a good employee. I can train people all day long to be great employees, but again, anytime those sorts of things, housing, child care, transportation, or insecure, the person's not going to be thinking. I tell people all the time, after 3 o'clock, if your child is walking home from school and you're not sure if somebody's going to be there to meet your child, or if you're just unsure about whether your child should be walking home by themselves from school, from 3 to 5 o'clock while you're still at the job, you're not really thinking about what you're supposed to be doing on the job, because you're worried about not missing that phone call to tell you that your child has made it into the house safely. So these are all the factors that I know oftentimes, particularly as nonprofit leaders, people think we are just sort of having this social services moment, and we're not thinking about the business of workforce or the business of making sure that people have secure housing. But these are all of the things that make up a great employee. There's no way in my, however many years career, that if I were having to worry about those issues, I could be the employee that I've been in many of the situations I've been in.
So let's take a look at the bigger picture then. I mean, we have social services that are available that, don't just stay in that box of being a social service. It also encompasses the business aspect, but particularly from housing, we've seen eviction protections. Other cities around the country have implemented rent caps to ensure that the low income residents of the city don't get priced out. But we also do know that here in the city of Detroit, we do have a housing crisis. We do have a housing need. And we also, at the same time, see these billion-dollar construction projects going up left and right all around us that are, inevitably going to drive up market rates across the board. What needs to be done from a government standpoint to ensure that people aren't getting priced out, that, Detroiters who have been here for decades, or Detroiters who found themselves in these positions for the first time, how do we ensure the protections against them in this situation?
So I'd love to start addressing that issue. From my perspective, it's two things. First, requiring some of these developers to allocate a portion of those housing projects to lower income individuals. And so that's what they're doing for a number of these projects, making sure that those folks don't get priced out of the market, and ensuring that area median income is addressed, and that we have housing specific to those people. And the second part is making sure that Detroiters are able to participate in the development through job training and jobs, and making sure that they have an opportunity to increase their wages so that they are more able to participate in the growth of Detroit and continue to live in Detroit and be able to pay their rent or own their own homes. So just two real quick thoughts from my perspective.
Yeah, I think, there's certainly been a push by the city and by the developers to make sure that they're including, so a lower income housing in all of these new developments. I often say that what Linda said about reaching out early is always crucial. If you've moved into a grandparent's house and you're not sure how you're going to maintain it or be able to afford it, the idea of reaching out before you get to a crisis point is always a better approach. I don't want to see anybody leave Detroit. It's my home. It's where I grew up. I think, Detroit is the best city in the world, to be honest with you. And I used to always tease a former boss that I would bring here from DC and tell him, there's no place like Detroit. If you're not from here, you need to pay to get in, because you'll never experience anything else. But the fact of the matter is that we have seen people leaving Detroit, and we're really trying to figure out how do we bring them back. And I think a large part of that is going to be making sure that there are places where they can afford to live. And then, you add in things like mass transportation, which I know is always a hot button issue, but, we have to figure out a way in which to get people around this city and this region much better. We have to figure that out. Young people are not going to come here. And a lot of folks aren't going to stay here because they don't know that they can also afford, as Linda was speaking about, if housing is costing this much, there's no room to add a car onto that. There's no room to add car insurance onto that. So people have to go where they can get to those jobs that we're training them for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with everything my fellow panelists have just said. And I'll add that that question is one in which, Jeremy, we have to kind of build that plane while we're flying because the crisis is here. And so we have to address the need now while we're thinking strategically about how do we sustain that? How do we build more housing units that are affordable? How do we address the average median income issue that we have in Detroit, where we have other cities in Wayne County that are factored in that have higher median incomes, causing our residents to pay more for their rent? How do we address that? I know City Council President Mary Sheffield had been working toward a Detroit AMI, and it didn't come to pass. That was ideal, right? How do we structure these affordable housing projects so that they're accommodating the folks, and there's incentives for the developers to have 500 to 700 a month rental units? How do we build this dream? You know, the American dream is home ownership. How do we build that dream and reinvent how we look at credit and qualifications for mortgages? Can we take rental income to count toward, rental payments to count toward qualifications for a mortgage? But the basic premise, I would say, because the root cause of housing insecurity is poverty. Wealthy people have issues every day. They have medical bills come in, their car breaks down, they have all of that stuff that happens to them as well, but they have the resources to pay for it. And so if we increase the minimum wages in our city, when I came to NSO, I probably shouldn't say this, but we had employees making $9 an hour.
Yeah, that's crazy.
$9 an hour. So we are an organization that is supposed to help the vulnerable population, and we're perpetuating it in our employees. So one of the first things that I did was raise the minimum to $15 an hour. And that's still not enough. Yep. Really, you need a base floor of about $20 an hour, $40,000 a year for people to just live. So if we empower people through income, we want people to be able to work for a living and have a little to save. So if they need, if the crisis occurs, there's a medical bill, that they have some money to cover that. But we are not teaching that. And so I'm telling you, this is such a big problem. How are we raising our children? Where are they learning how to budget and manage their finances? How are they learning how to live on their own? We, all of us, I know we all look like we're about middle-aged. I know when I went to school, we learned all of that in school. Yeah. And we probably have parents who've also taught us that. But if you're growing up in an environment where your parents either don't have the time because they're working multiple jobs, or a lot of people have lost the heads of households and breadwinners in their families during this pandemic, let's be real about that too. And so they're trying to figure it out on their own now. Where are they going to get help? Where's that support? And so it's not one problem. This is a multifaceted issue that we have to build while we're flying this plane. And bringing people together like this is a wonderful way to create that synergy for solutions.
And I don't mean to belabor this point, but you said a whole lot right there that was just spot on, right? So two things I want to expand on. One, it's not necessarily that housing is not affordable. I mean, $1,200 on average is not necessarily the issue. The issue is that wages are too low, right? So if you're making
that's what I want to touch on in just a moment.
That's the problem right there. And I'm so glad that you did that for your employees. We did the same thing. When I look at childcare providers as an example, we're paying, $10, $11 an hour for people who have one of the most important jobs on the face of the earth. That is not a sustainable living. That is the issue, is that wages are too low. And then the second issue, an elephant in the room sometimes in my household amongst my family conversations, is we're not spending our money wisely, right? So Black people in general are plagued by the fact that wages are too low and our spending habits are horrible. When you start looking at, from a budget perspective, I'm a CPA, so this is near and dear to my heart. You're asking me for help. I'm telling you what to do. Stop spending money on non-essentials, hair, nails, lashes. Like, come on, guys. These are real conversations that we need to be having with people around priorities. I mean, housing is more important.
We had to, I can only piggyback on what Linda and Terry have said, because we had to do the same thing in Focus Hope. We were exact same position, $9 an hour for so many of our employees, raised it to $15 an hour, started a matching 401k for all of our employees. Because what we found is that when we had, for instance, we had somebody give us a donation, we'd be looking for people outside of Focus Hope to give the donation to. And then it dawned on me that more of our people that worked for me at Focus Hope needed the donation than the people I was trying to serve that were in my workforce development program. So first and foremost was raising wages. And I think it's important to point out that people tend to think, particularly in the nonprofit world, that these things just happen, right? That they are just, that they just happen because we're a do-good organization. And so everything just kind of falls into place. You have to be really intentional about how you're going to raise wages and making sure that you can cover those wages. It took me probably a little bit of time when I first got here 5 years ago, because we had to make sure we could sustain it. The worst thing I could do was to raise wages and then a year from now say we can't continue to do that and decrease wages again. That was not going to help anybody. So doing that and being intentional about it and intentional about how we serve is really something that I think all of us are really focused on, and how we can give more. I think financial literacy is such a big component of our workforce development program, because as Linda said, I tell the story all the time. When I bought my first house, I had parents who were both professionals. They were able to walk me through it. I'm a lawyer by training. Like, there were some things I inherently knew. But there are a whole lot of us out here who've never had that experience, whose parents couldn't walk them through it. Maybe they've never purchased a home in their lives, right? We get away from check cashing places. I don't want anybody cashing their work check in a check cashing place, right? They didn't even, when we talked about 401ks, people were like, I don't have enough money to do that. I was like, but you do. We're also thinking about automatically opting our employees in and having them allow them to opt out if they don't want it. But I really think that for some of us, we don't understand the importance of that, either now or in the future. When you get ready to retire from a nonprofit, you may not have anything other than, the gift we give you when you retire. That's not going to be enough to sustain you. And so then you find yourself on the other end, the receiving end of Focus Hope's Food for Seniors program, which doesn't serve the community. So it's always a circular sort of thought process in how we are treating the whole family, and what other things can we add to make sure low-income families in particular, but a lot of middle-income families as well, have what they need and know where to find the help.
One of the things that I thought was extremely important that all three of you touched on is the very intentional process of raising wages at your respective organizations for your employers or for your employees. But, as part of corporate social responsibility, we don't always see that do good for the general public mentality kind of take its course, right? And over the years, especially since, in the aftermath of George Floyd, we saw a lot of people implementing a lot of performative and sometimes substantive initiatives at their organizations to empower folks who were often on the low income side of the food chain within those organizations. But how can we compel other employers across the city to see that as a way to lift all boats, right? The rising tide lifts all boats. But how do we get other employers across the city to understand that that is a necessity without them saying it's going to be too great of an impact on our business to raise wages across the board?
Well, I'll just jump in and say, first and foremost, I'm always making sure that people are reminded that nonprofits, particularly the ones that Linda and I run, are corporations. We run. I always tell people nonprofit is our tax status. It has nothing to do with how we run. So we have to think about it in the same way in which, Ford or General Motors or Stellantis thinks about raising wages. We don't get to just do it and somebody fills in the gap for us. We have to work hard at it. So, I think we think about it in the same way. And so I think people have to be driven to do it, because what we've seen in recent times is that workers are demanding that they get wages that are fair and that grow as the economy and inflation has impacted their living wage. So they're demanding that. I also think young people are going to be a driving force in making sure that a lot of what happened after George Floyd is not just performative. I didn't consider when I came to Focus Hope that I, as an employer, would have to think about so many of the things that I think about now as it relates to how we work, as it relates to what is offered at work, as it relates to the mental health of our employees and whether they feel good. And I think a lot of that has come out of a demand from younger people as they enter the workforce about how they want to work and how they want to live. And I think they are also demanding that the companies that they work for are really making sure that people or that those companies are very much including diversity, inclusion, making sure that we are talking about the issues. There's, they are not letting major employers sort of hide their head when it comes to issues that they're facing outside of the workplace. And I think that'll continue to happen. I think young people are really going to drive all of us to push ourselves beyond what we may have thought we were going to be doing 5, 6, 7, 10 years ago, because they're asking for more from their employers.
And you'll see it's already happened since the pandemic, since George Floyd. I mean, you've seen a rise in wages across the Metro Detroit area. In fact, Grow Detroit Young Talent, which employs 8,000 youth over the summer every year, raised its wages. We raised our wages to $15 an hour in response to the fact that so did McDonald's and Wendy's, right? So in order to be competitive, all employers are going to have to take a look at this. So if they haven't already, they're seeing it in their recruiting or lack thereof in terms of, not having quality candidates. That's the reality right now. But the issue is that even $15 is not enough to sustain a family.
So, Jeremy, I think, I agree with everything Portia and Terry said. But I'll add that if we had not seen it before, two things in the last couple of years have taught us the importance of employees and their voice. And that is the Great Resignation and COVID-19. So trying to bring people back to work and business as usual is not happening. We're going to have to rethink how we do the work that we do. And that's everybody, not just us who deliver services in the community. But also the Great Resignation let us know that employees are truly, and I come from I'm a nurse, I have an OD background, organizational development. So I've heard this for almost 30 years. Your employees are your greatest asset. They're your most valuable asset. But I think today companies feel it at the deepest level than I've seen in my career, because employees are now saying, I don't have to cower to you. I want to select the type of work culture that I want to work in. I want to work on my terms. I want to have balance. I want to have, a fair wage. I want to be able to live and enjoy life and not work 20 hours a day. And so if employers are not listening to that, we cannot be successful. There's a new workforce and they're demanding something different. So if we don't evolve and change with the times, NSO's been around for almost 70 years, and it is a very different organization today than it was even 3 years ago because of the changes that have had to be made. So we have to listen to what our audience, our workforce is calling for, and meet that demand. And if that means that we have to look at different reimbursement models, we have to look at how we structure our business differently, how we deliver the services or products that we offer, then that's what it takes. Because that's what Portia and I have to do. That's what Terry has to do, to figure out how are we going to pay for this increased demand for salaries and wages and benefits, by the way. It's not just salaries and wages, it's the benefits also. So this is just a time for us to do it, but that's what leaders are for. That's why we're in leadership positions. And we have to call upon other organizations, the biggest to the small businesses as well, to do the same. And then, lean on certain entities to help inform, because everybody doesn't innately know how to do this. So tools and structures to help support small businesses. Larger corporations usually have more resources, but the smaller businesses and nonprofits, corporate, Portia and I come from corporate world, so we understand and have lived through some of this already. And so people who haven't, they need tools and resources to do it.
I want to switch topics here just a little bit, because in one way, shape, or form, all three of you have touched on the importance of education, whether through job training or continued employment, or the impact of insecurity in other areas impacting education. What needs to happen in order to be a real steward within the K-12 area specifically to showcase to low-income residents that the city is truly in their favor? I had a chance to talk to the superintendent, Nikolai Vidi, back earlier this summer, and one of the major issues that was addressed was chronic absenteeism. COVID-19 really did a number on students and parents and their ability to get to school. And from my personal perspective, I felt like the city had taken some measures and the district had taken some measures to kind of overcome that. But even if you look at a funding, from a state funding perspective, there's not enough done to really incentivize schools and districts to care enough to solve these problems. How do we address this at, again, a grassroots level to ensure that the K through 12 education pipeline readies students not to continue paths of the low income outcomes that are often the result of poor education?
So if I can take that from a healthcare lens, because we're born with an innate curiosity to learn, to grow. It's a part of our development. So when you have children who are not engaged in that process, we have to look at the root cause of the problem. And what COVID-19, and I'll tell you, we deal with a lot of people who are homeless. Those children are sleeping in cars at night. And I'm not talking onesies, twosies. This is a major problem in our city. So they don't have a safe place to live. And that causes, even if they're moving around and they're at auntie's house across town, they're not going to school because they can't get there. So looking at root causes and really working with community partners to address root causes is one way that we can really help get at what's going on with our children. And then, so at NSO, we take a trauma-informed approach to our delivery of services. Helping those children to heal and regain a sense of well-being and wholeness is absolutely critical to that process as well, so that they can effectively learn and grow and develop to become healthy, contributing citizens in Detroit. That's my quick 2 cents, but I could talk about that all day.
I could too. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I've served on a board of education. I am very keen on education. I mean, just to start off, a high school diploma, we all know, is the difference in lifetime earnings of $1 million, right? And what is tragic is that there are over 50 to 60,000 Detroiters who lack that credential. And every year we add 1,000 more individuals to that when we have, our high schoolers are not graduating. Now, I'm going to give Dr. Vidi a lot of credit. He's done a lot of great work. It takes years to change a school system. And graduation rates have increased, which is good news, especially given the pandemic, because we know that absenteeism was an issue and has become an even greater issue since the pandemic. But a couple things from my perspective. First, addressing, as Linda said, barriers at the home level. When kids are not eating well, when they're hungry, when they have housing issues, they're not showing up to school. They're either not going, or when they do show up, they're not paying attention. So we've got to solve that. I appreciate the fact that now breakfast and lunch is available to all students. That's huge. That's key. I think that's going to be extremely helpful. I know the governor has spent more this past budget season on education than before, which is great, but it's still not enough. We lag other states when it comes to investments in our kids, and we've got to change that. We've also got to change the way that we approach education. In my opinion, we've got to start over. We are teaching kids the same way we did 100 years ago, in the same buildings that we did 100 years ago, in the same instructional pedagogy that we did 100 years ago. And our kids are not going to sit still in a classroom and pay attention and be talked at the same way they did 100 years ago. Behaviors are different. Learning styles are different. We've really got to change that and really make school more engaging for students. And that means we're going to have to invest. Right now, no one has the time to develop different curriculum or develop the kinds of interesting project-based learnings that are going to appeal to students today. So we've got to address it. We've got to address transportation barriers. Kids need more before or after school activities, in my opinion. We've kind of lost that. That is the reason some of our kids actually go to school, is for theater or music or football or whatever the case may be. And we've got to make that stuff more accessible to our kids. And I think that transportation is a barrier at this point for those kinds of things. So I could talk forever on this subject. It's extremely important to me, but I know that the city of Detroit realizes that this is an issue, which is why they created a Learn to Earn program for adults who are missing that credential, so that they can go back to school, get paid while they do it, and not be forced to, either go back and get that high school credential or miss earnings. So I think that's a step in the right direction. But I think we all acknowledge that education is an issue here, and that continued learning is something that we definitely need to keep focused on.
I could really just say ditto to what Terry and Linda have already said, but let me say this. So 2 things. One is I currently chair the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, and we did a housing conference probably about 3-4 weeks ago. And a young woman came to speak, and just as Terry and Linda have said, she was on the cusp of being evicted. She'd rented a house from someone. The landlord had stopped paying the mortgage on the home, even though she had still been paying her rent to him. So she knew that the house was going to be foreclosed on, and she was going to be evicted. She was with a child who she was holding in her arms, so a very young child, and a little boy who was probably about 6 or 7 years old. And as she began to tell us her story about housing, the first thing she said was, my son has not been to school this year because I haven't had the opportunity to take him because I'm worried about where we're going to end up, right? And, it was a sobering moment for those of us listening because, again, many of us have not had that experience. And so the thought that this was late November and this child had not been to school all year was immediately, the first thought I could think was, how far is that kid going to be behind when he eventually gets back into school? And that's assuming that he goes into school in January, right? Because pretty much this semester is done, right? So that was the real first thing about her story that stood out to me. The other piece is, how do we make sure that we do evolve in terms of our educational system? If you look at how we all talk to one another, or how we all anything you do in your home, we do differently than we did even 5 years ago, right? Or 10 years ago. You always see those memes on Instagram or on Facebook, or even for those who have young children, where they can't even identify what a landline is, right? They've never seen one before. And really, if you think about that, education is a place where we haven't made any major changes in how we educate children, even though most of us who have young children in our lives know that if we need to know how to use our phone, or we need to know how to use our iPad, go get an 8-year-old, go get a 12-year-old, because they're going to be the ones who can teach you how to use it. And yet when they go to school, they're still pulling out those same instruction guides. The teacher's still teaching off a model that I learned when I was in school many years ago. That has to change. I mean, there's often talk, and certainly I don't know what that looks like, to just blow up the system and start again. I think, as Terry said, Nikolai Beatty has done some wonderful things trying to improve the school district, but I also think it is about making sure people feel secure in their lives outside of sending their children to school, because that's the way they're going to better, they're going to understand how important it is. And here's the thing. I don't think there's any parent out there that doesn't want the very best for their children. Low income, upper middle class, whomever it is, you want the very best for your children. And I want to make sure that it doesn't seem like this woman was being cavalier about her son not going to school. It was clear it was breaking her heart that she could not get him to school every day. But with so much else going on in her life, it was impossible whether she could get there every day, whether when they got home from her picking him up from school, there was going to be a home to come to. So I think, oftentimes there is this narrative that at a certain economical status, parents don't care as much. And I think that's absolutely not true. Parents care just as much and want just as much for their children as anybody else does. It's just that the battles are so much more, there are so many more battles that they're having to fight daily that they can't make that their sole focus. So I think, we've got to really think about how are we shortchanging our children. And truthfully, from a workforce development standpoint and from an economic standpoint for these major corporations, if we're not going to make the investment now, we're going to be in an even worse state later on, because the people that we're not investing in, the young children we're not investing in now, are the workforce of 10 years from now or 15 years from now. And they're not going to be prepared for what you need for them to do or what you want them to come to your for-profit corporation to do if we don't make an investment right now.
No, I think that is spot on. One of the questions that I have too, though, is this. It's important that services exist for the support and care and to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. But what needs to be done in order for that relationship to be reciprocated, for the most vulnerable people to feel like they are being supported, right? Because the intentions at the top with the creation and deployment of services and organizations, the great work is being done in so many different areas across the board. But what needs to be done in order for the people who require those services to really feel like, this is really to help me, to assist me, and to meet the needs of where I am?
I'll jump in and say I give all of that to the staff at Focus Hope. I mean, when I talk to students who come into Focus Hope, when I talk to parents whose children are in our Head Start program, they feel supported because of the staff that comes to work every day to make sure that they have everything that they need and go above and beyond. I'm sure this is true for all of us, but really, we're at a certain level where, yes, we're interacting as much as we can, but it's not the day-to-day interaction. I've seen teachers over here stay as late as they need to. So because a mom got off of work a little bit later than she expected, right? They're never going to leave a child here. They're going to find some snacks if the child is hungry before they get home, so that they make sure that they don't give a mother her child and say, he's starving now because we didn't do anything else. I see our placement coordinator and our workforce development program call students after they've started working to make sure it's working out, have them come back in if they're hearing that, the student has not gone to work consistently. They call them up, they tell them to come back in so we can have a sit down about why they're not going to work consistently. Ultimately, what I end up hearing, the stories I get are from those students or those parents who are like, I was sort of not taking it as seriously, or I was having trouble that day, and your staff members stopped and took the time with me. So I do think when they come to any of our organizations, it's the people who do the day-to-day work that make the people we're servicing feel like we are here for them, and letting them know that we are here for them, not just feel it, but know that we are here for them. And it's the follow-up. I mean, one thing I always say is once you're part of the Focus Hope family, you are always a part of the Focus Hope family. So once you start that job and things get tough, and there'll be days where it would be easier to be at home, or there would be days that you might not get along with a colleague and you don't want to go back. We're the place you're supposed to call so we can walk you through some of those pitfalls so you don't have to make some of the same mistakes that even we've made in our careers, and kind of guide you through that. So I think, again, I can only say that I give kudos to the staff here at Focus Hope, because they go so far in making sure that the people that we service, that we do it with respect, that we do it with honor to them, and that we recognize, we have we talk about this all the time at Focus Hope, that, most of us are taught to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And so when you come into a place like NSO, when you come into a place like Focus Hope, you're kind of going against what people have told you to ask for help, right? And so what we want to make sure of is that when you do that, when you come into a place like ours and ask for help, that we do it as respectfully as possible, because but for the grace of God go each one of us. Any one of us could be in a situation where we need some help. And so we kind of try to make sure that we keep that thought in our head at all times, because that's going to affect the way we treat the people who are coming to us to ask for help.
I couldn't agree more with what Portia just said. In fact, I was going to say the same thing, that it is people. It is our people at Detroit at Work, is Portia's people at Focus Hope, and it's Linda's folks. And so we do actually a lot of referrals to both of those organizations. And every time I hear about a success story, it's along with the person that helped them. There are lots of social programs out there, and you could give out food and you could do this and you could do that. But when you partner with someone and you have an advocate, you have a mentor, that is what significantly increases the efficacy and success of a social program. 100% of the time, it improves the resiliency of the participant. It improves and promotes their mental health. We're seeing it with a program we have going on right now with Jumpstart that Portia's team actually supports right now. Portia's team, her staff, are the mentors for our participants, and they are with them on a regular basis, making sure that they get their barriers addressed, that wraparound services are actually being provided, that they're giving them coaching, advice, support, encouragement. That is what I believe really helps support the success of a social program. It's not just having one, because there have been many, and some of them have varying degrees of success. But I think it's the people behind those programs that are actually, on the ground, working with those individuals on a day-to-day basis to make sure that their barriers are removed and their goals are achieved.
Undoubtedly, what Terry and Portia just said is the crux of it. We have a motto at NSO that we love on people until they're able to love on themselves. But I think, on top of that, because I agree, our staff is phenomenal, and people don't choose this work if they don't have a heart to serve other people. You just don't do this. You don't come into
$10 an hour, right, Linda?
Right. I mean,
exactly. Like teachers, right? Yeah.
Right. But I would say at a broader, more systems level, if you take a macro level approach, that the integration of services and connectivity, so that when somebody goes to Focus Hope, they're tapped into the system and they don't have to keep saying the same thing over and over, or keep kind of trying to give the same information over and over. If we had a community information exchange system, let's say, that when you tap into the safety net of our community, that there's a resource pool that knows who you are and treats you and meets you where you are. And you don't have to keep reinventing that. If we work together synergistically so that we collectively wrap our arms around people in need and support them from a holistic perspective, wow, wouldn't that be amazing? That was one of the things that we did at NSO is, our departments, we had multiple departments that functioned like silos. So somebody could be in an NSO program over here and show up at an NSO program over here, and the teams wouldn't even know it. So now we have one door to NSO. We have a centralized call center, and our assessment model assesses for whatever services and programs that you need. And we connect you throughout our organization and with our community partners if we need to. So if we took that approach at looking at the person and what that person needs, not just what you offer, because if you don't deliver that, if I don't do workforce, how can I connect them to Portia or Terry and do it in a way that we're still all working together for you? Not I'm handing you off and let her deal with that. So I think that we as a community can do better with the structure at a macro level that integrates our systems and solutions and supports for people who need it, so that when they tap in, they get the help they need across different sectors.
And I think those two things are hugely, hugely important. It is the integration, the ease of access to the services for the people who are in need of them, and then the hiring practices of the organizations, like you guys talked about. So when people come into organizations, they feel like they're being greeted by people who understand them, who get them, who have identified their needs because they are a part of their community, and they have shared backgrounds and experiences. I think both of those things that you all pointed out are very key. But as we're winding down here on time, I just want to know briefly from each of you, what's something that can be done tomorrow, whether it be from a political or from an interpersonal or from a civic or an education or a healthcare perspective, to really make an impact and leave a lasting impression, something that's both, can be implemented and could be communicated to the people most in need. What's something that can happen, relatively quickly to show low income residents that here are people who care about you and here's why they care about you?
I think we've done better since the pandemic started. I would have said probably beforehand that we could. I think everyone could champion nonprofits and the work of the city more, because I didn't think at that time that we championed them, and I still think there's work to be done in that area. I think that what we saw during the pandemic is people realized there was so much that was being done at both the city level and at nonprofits to really support low-income families in a way that they are supposed to, and that we want to do more. But sometimes people, again, have this position that nonprofits are just sort of existing out there and that we're not key to making sure families are successful and that people are successful. I think that's still something that we could do. I still think that, really elevating the work of so many nonprofits. I mean, I've always said, and you can tell Linda and I are down the street from one another, we're neighbors, because much of what she's done, I've done here at Focus Hope as well, which is integrating our systems and then thinking about, I'm never going to get into the business of housing insecurity. Why? Because I have an excellent nonprofit partner right down the street who does that work, right? I know that there are often times where a young person will come to me and they want to get involved, but they want to find employment, but they really don't want what we offer. So I know I can go to Detroit at Work. I know I can now look at Jumpstart and refer them there. I think that collective idea of we are here as partners to make sure that people get all the help they need. And it doesn't mean that I have to start something new every time somebody has something different needs something different than what I provide. I think elevating that to our residents is huge for us, and making sure that from an elected official standpoint, from us as nonprofit leaders, from Detroit at Work, from DSC, from all of those, that we're elevating the work that so many of the nonprofits do. Because there are other ones out there. There are lots of ones out there who deal with different communities, but we all are working together and trying to work more to make sure that people's needs are met.
I would, I'd agree with everything that Portia said. The city of Detroit, when the pandemic hit, started an organization called Community Health Corps. And the purpose of that organization was to understand the landscape across nonprofits in the city of Detroit and connect Detroiters to those resources. So they were actually doing door-to-door knocking across the city of Detroit, identifying people who needed help, because those are the people who need the help, not the people who know where the resources are, right? And so once they got into the home and realized that a person was living without heat, hey, did you know about thaw? Let me take you by the hand, write out the paperwork for you if you don't have the capacity to do it, and get you connected. So I think the city's trying to do a lot more outreach to make sure that people know all of the good work that is going on across the city of Detroit, and all of the wonderful nonprofits that are doing good work. I think that Portia, Linda, and I do a good job of coordinating. I love the fact that Portia knows, like, I don't have to get into that space because I can talk to my partner over here. But there are 300 plus organizations, nonprofit organizations within the city of Detroit that are duplicating effort. And I think that if we could get together and better coordinate and promote those that are doing good, and maybe, this is where people don't like to hear it, but maybe if we could fold in or consolidate some of the others, we could do so much more, eliminate a lot of the redundancy, and do a lot more great work. I really think that there's something to be done there. Again, everybody's doing really great work, but I think that there are more opportunities to streamline. I think the larger nonprofit organizations are doing it already. But I think there's some more work that could be done across the board.
Yeah, I agree, Terry. And that's one thing Portia and I both did when we took over these organizations. We did just that and went to our core and let other people who did those ancillary things that we were doing do that, because that's what they do. But I'll add, because I agree with them, I'll add that organizations, what the pandemic and the George Floyd illumination is what I'll call it, taught us, is that it taught everybody that, wow, I really need to focus on disparities, or I really need to focus on social barriers or social determinants. Oh, wow, I need to hire social workers. I need to hire case managers. I need to hire, which is great that they're thinking like that. But we also have this accompanying workforce shortage of that very workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is almost a zero-sum game. So when hospitals or health plans or the like start hiring social workers, case managers who have community experience, lived experience, et cetera, they're pulling away from the safety net. They're pulling away from nonprofits like Portia's and mine that really needs those boots on the ground to help deliver the services that we deliver. And the pipeline is very thin. The School of Social Work at Wayne State, I was just talking to them recently, they've had a 40% decline in enrollment in their social work program. That's a problem. So we're building that plane while we're flying it, right? So we need to really look at, how do we leverage best the assets in our communities, just like we had to do, Portia and I, when we came on and said, how do we, really want to structure our organizations to do what we do best? I challenge other business organizations, parts of this continuum, to look at that as well, and let the people who do this work do the work for them. Partner, collaborate. Don't take resources from the community to build their own infrastructures. And then I would also say to our community, there's a lot of mistrust in our community in different entities, and they really trust the nonprofits, the community-based organizations. So I will say, trust the help. There's so many programs that are out there today that did not exist 3 years ago, that is aimed to help you be better tomorrow than you are today. So trust that help. Reach out and let us help make all Detroit advance in this renaissance.
I think that was a perfect bow on the discussion here. And it really is going to take input from all aspects of the Detroit community in order to really put together some action items that will allow the low income residents to really feel cared for and to really get access to the resources that you all provide. I want to thank you all, Terry, Linda, Portia, for joining the Michigan Chronicles Pancakes and Politics Overdrive series. This has been a really wonderful discussion. Obviously, this discussion only cracks the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so many more discussions to be had, policies to be implemented, connections to resources. But what I always like to do is to allow people the opportunity to connect with your organizations. So we'll just do a quick round robin here. Tell people how they can get in contact with your organizations, whether they are in need of services or want to support the services that you provide. How can people do that?
We've got an easy website. It's detroitatwork.com or gdyt.org if you're interested in a summer internship, or 313-962-WORK.
And mine is easy too. It's nso-mi.org for our website, and there's all kinds of information there. And we also have a central number, 888-360-WELL, WELL. That's a great way to connect with us as well. And we're also on all social media if you wanted to follow us there.
I was going to say, for most of us, we get a lot on social media. So we're on all social media platforms, but we're also at focushope.edu, not for education rather than org. So focushope.edu and 313-494-4550.
Thank you again, ladies, for joining us for the second edition of Pancakes and Politics Overdrive with the Michigan Chronicle. I'm the executive editor, Jeremy Allen.
Presenting partner, Business Leaders for Michigan. Broadcast partner, General Motors. Pancakes and Politics is brought to you by PNC Bank. A Real Times Media Production.